Trump sparks. End times panic after leaving the world shocked with this statement. Something satisfactorily shifted this week, and if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it. But the world didn't miss it. Governments didn't miss it. Markets didn't miss it. Intelligence agencies didn't miss it. And by the time this video is over, you're going to understand why one statement, just a few sentences from a sitting US president, sent shockwaves through the entire global order and left millions of people asking a question they never thought they'd have to ask. Are we watching the beginning of something biblical? Let me show you exactly what happened. And pay close attention, because the words themselves are only part of the story. It's what came after that should concern everyone watching. Here's what Donald Trump said. I have to say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic right now. Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it. I can tell you. Now, if that were all he said, this might have been a one-day headline. Provocative? Sure. Controversial? Absolutely. But politicians make bold statements all the time. What made this different? What made the entire world stop and take notice? Was what came next. Trump didn't back down. He doubled down. And then he escalated in ways that no one expected. He said, if we don't go in, Russia will go in, and China will go in. And there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it, but we can do everything about it. He said, we are going to do something on Greenland whether they like it or not. Because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland. And we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. He said, one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland. And when reporters pressed him on how far he was willing to go, what methods he would use, his answer sent chills through diplomatic channels around the world. He simply said, you'll find out. You'll find out. 3 words that left everything on the table. Military action, economic coercion, diplomatic pressure. No option explicitly ruled out. No line clearly drawn. Just ambiguity. The kind of ambiguity that makes allies nervous and enemies calculating. But here's what truly shocked the world. And this is where this story transforms from political drama into something that should capture the attention of every believer watching. Trump didn't stop at words. He didn't stop at threats. He took action. And the action he took wasn't aimed at America's enemies. It was aimed at America's closest friends. Within days of these statements, Trump announced tariffs, not on Russia, not on China, not on Iran or North Korea, but on 8 European nations: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Finland, all NATO allies, all nations that have stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States for over 70 years. All of them suddenly targeted with economic weapons that, until this moment, were reserved for adversaries. The reaction was immediate, and it was unlike anything we've seen in modern diplomatic history. Emergency meetings were convened across Europe, some within hours of the announcement. The European Union issued statements of condemnation. NATO officials scrambled to assess whether the alliance itself could survive this kind of internal fracture. Stock markets dropped as investors processed the implications of a potential transatlantic trade war. The Swedish government publicly refused to be blackmailed. France rejected what it called economic intimidation from an ally. And within days, several European nations began deploying military personnel to Greenland. Small contingents, largely symbolic, but the message was clear. We stand with Denmark. We will not be bullied. Think about that for a moment. Allied nations deploying troops, not to confront a shared enemy, but to signal resistance against the United States. This isn't the Cold War. This isn't a standoff with a hostile power. This is the Western Alliance, the foundation of global stability for 3/4 of a century, showing cracks that many believed were impossible. But here's the question that no one seems to be asking loudly enough. And it's the question that will frame everything I'm about to show you in this video. Why? What is it about this moment, this specific moment in history, that made the world react so violently to words that, in another era, might have been dismissed as political bluster? The answer isn't really about Greenland. It's not even really about Trump. Greenland is just the surface. Trump is just the catalyst. And if you're paying attention, if you're someone who reads scripture and watches the world with discerning eyes, that revelation should hit differently than it does for everyone else. Because here's what most people don't realize, and this is where this story takes a turn that I need you to follow very carefully. What we're witnessing isn't just politics, it's a pattern that Jesus Christ himself described nearly 2,000 years ago. A pattern that the apostles warned the early church to watch for. A pattern that has appeared in Scripture for millennia, waiting for the generation that would see it unfold in real time. And if you understand what Jesus said, what's happening right now takes on an entirely different meaning. The birth pains are intensifying. The signs Jesus described are becoming harder and harder to dismiss. And the speed at which things are now moving should cause every believer to sit up. But here's what makes this even more unsettling. The statement about Greenland was shocking. The tariffs on allies were unprecedented. Now we need to go directly to Scripture. Because what I've shown you so far, the statement, the tariffs, the fracturing alliances, the economic warfare. In Matthew 24, the disciples came to Jesus privately and asked him a question that has echoed through every generation since. Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered them. He gave them a list of signs, not to frighten them, but to prepare them. And the very first thing he mentioned was this. Matthew 24:6-8 says, "And ye shall hear of wars, and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." Did you catch that phrase at the end? The beginning of sorrows. In the original Greek, the word used is odin, which means birth pains, labor contractions, the kind of pain that comes before something new is born. But here's what's critical to understand, and this is where many people misread this passage. Birth pains are not the birth itself. They're the warning that the birth is approaching. They increase in frequency, they increase in intensity, but they come before the main event, not during it. Jesus is telling his disciples and us that when we see these patterns emerging, we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't panic. We should recognize them for what they are, signs that history is moving toward its conclusion. But here's what makes this passage even more relevant to what we're seeing today. And this connects directly to the Greenland situation and everything that followed. Notice what Jesus says about nations. Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. For most of history, people have interpreted that as military conflict, armies clashing, Wars fought with swords and spears, and eventually guns and bombs. And that interpretation isn't wrong. Military war is certainly part of what Jesus described. But the Greek word for nation here is ethnos, which can mean a nation-state, but also refers to people groups, ethnicities, and cultural identities. And the word for rise against doesn't necessarily mean armed combat. It means to stand against, to oppose, to be in conflict with. What we're witnessing right now, allies turning against allies, economic weapons deployed against friends, alliances fracturing over territory and resources, fits this description perfectly. Nation is rising against nation, not with tanks and missiles, but with tariffs and sanctions and political pressure. And Jesus said this would be just the beginning. But here's what most people miss, because understanding this is the key to understanding why this moment felt so different from normal politics. Jesus didn't just warn about what would happen. He warned about how people would respond. And that response, the fear, the panic, the desperation for security, is actually the greater danger. It's the setup for something Jesus warned about before he even mentioned wars and rumors of wars. Here's something that most people overlook when they study Jesus' teachings about the end times, and this might be the most important thing I show you in this entire video. When the disciples asked him what signs to watch for, the very first thing he said, before wars, before earthquakes, before famines, was this. Matthew 24, 4-5. Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Deception. That's the first warning. Not war. Not disaster. Deception. Now think back to everything I've shown you. When people are afraid, truly afraid, the kind of fear that grips your chest and keeps you awake at night, they become desperate. They look for solutions. They look for saviors. They look for anyone who promises to make the fear go away. And that desperation creates an opening for deception. Think about what happens during economic instability. Remember what I showed you: markets crash, jobs disappear, prices rise, retirement accounts shrink. And suddenly, people who felt secure feel vulnerable. They feel exposed, and they become willing to accept solutions they would have rejected when times were good. This is how strong men rise. This is how freedoms are traded for security. This is how populations embrace leaders and systems that promise stability, even if those leaders and systems come with strings attached that would have been unthinkable in calmer times. Fear doesn't just destabilize markets. Fear destabilizes discernment. When you're afraid, you don't think clearly. You react. You grasp at whatever seems to offer relief. And if someone comes along with confident answers, with promises of security, with assurances that they alone can fix the chaos, fear makes you more likely to believe them. This is why Jesus warned about deception first, because deception doesn't work on people who are calm, confident, and grounded. It works on people who are shaken, desperate, and afraid. And if you look at the world right now, the economic uncertainty, the fracturing alliances, the constant barrage of crises and conflicts, you're looking at conditions that are perfectly designed to make deception effective. Remember what I said about the speed of escalation, that speed doesn't just create fear. It prevents clear thinking. It's the perfect environment for deception to take root. But here's the good news. And this is why understanding this pattern matters so much, and why the next section is essential for maintaining proper perspective. If you recognize the trap, you don't have to fall into it. If you understand that fear is the setup for deception, you can guard your heart against both. Jesus didn't warn us about these things so we would panic. He warned us so we would be prepared, so we would recognize the patterns, so we would not be deceived when everyone around us is grasping at false solutions. Now I need to pause and say something very directly, because I know how easy it is to watch events like this unfold and jump to conclusions. And I know that some people watching this video are already wondering, is this it? Is this the end? Let me be clear. What I'm showing you is not the end. This is not the tribulation. This is not the rapture. This is not the final fulfillment of Matthew 24. And here's why getting this right matters so much. Because the difference between pattern recognition and date setting is the difference between the wisdom Jesus called us to and the foolishness He warned us against. What this is, and I want you to hear this carefully, is pattern recognition. Every generation has looked at the events of their time and seen signs of the end. Every generation has pointed to wars, famines, earthquakes, and political upheaval, and wondered if they were living in the final days. And they weren't wrong to wonder. Jesus told us to watch. He told us to be ready. He told us that these signs would come. But He also told us something else. He said, "The end is not yet." He said, "These things are the beginning of sorrows, birth pains, contractions that signal something is coming, but not the birth itself." So what makes this moment significant? Not that it's the end, but that the patterns are converging. And here's why that matters. And this connects to what I'll show you about false security in Scene 10. The convergence itself is revealing. It's exposing where our trust actually rests. Here's what I mean. In past generations, you might have seen economic instability in one region while other regions remained stable. You might have seen political conflict between certain nations while alliances elsewhere held firm. You might have seen natural disasters or cultural upheaval in isolated pockets while the broader global system remained intact. What's different now is the convergence. Economic instability isn't isolated, it's global. Political fragmentation isn't regional, it's happening across continents. Alliances aren't just stressed, they're fracturing in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. And the speed. Everything is accelerating. Remember what I showed you the pace of escalation isn't slowing down. It's increasing. Information moves instantly. Markets react in seconds. Crises that would have taken months to develop now unfold in days. This doesn't mean we're in the final chapter, but it does mean the birth pains are intensifying. The frequency is increasing. The patterns Jesus described are becoming harder to ignore. But here's what's equally important, and this is something many prophecy teachers forget to emphasize, and it's relevant for believers and skeptics alike. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, the pattern is the same. And what we're watching right now looks a lot like the early stages of that pattern. So what does this mean for those who follow Christ? That's exactly what we need to talk about next. Because the response to all of this matters even more than the events themselves. If you're a believer watching this video, I need to speak directly to you right now. Because everything I've shown you, the geopolitical tension, the economic warfare, the fracturing alliances, the patterns that echo biblical prophecy, all of it can produce one of two responses: fear or faith. And only one of those responses honors God. And here's what's crucial. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where everything I've shown you becomes personal. Let me say this as clearly as I can. You were not given a spirit of fear. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind." A sound mind. That's what God has given you. Not panic, not anxiety, not the kind of fear that makes your heart fail as you watch the headlines. He's given you the ability to see clearly, think clearly, and stand firmly, even when everything around you is shaking. Remember what I told you in Scene 7 about fear and deception. A sound mind is your protection against both. And this is where believers must be different from the world. The world panics when markets drop. The world panics when alliances fracture. The world panics when the systems they've trusted begin to show cracks. Because for the world, those systems are everything. Their security is built on economies, governments, and human institutions. But for believers, our security is built on something, on someone that cannot be shaken. Now, our question of the day. What's the one pattern from this video that hit you the hardest?